Sometimes the most expensive mistake a powerful person can make lasts less than 5 seconds. The executive lobby of Mercer Holdings was alive with movement as senior managers, investors, and department leaders crossed the polished marble floor beneath towering glass walls that overlooked downtown Atlanta. Sunlight streamed through the windows, painting long golden reflections across the building's elegant interior. Near the reception area, a black woman in a simple navy blazer stepped through the revolving doors carrying a leather folder and a small travel bag. She looked calm, focused, and completely unremarkable to the people around her. No designer labels. No security detail. No signs of wealth or influence. Just a woman walking quietly through a building filled with people who believed they could identify importance the moment they saw it. At that exact moment, Dalton Mercer emerged from a nearby hallway surrounded by executives. As Chief Executive Officer of Mercer Holdings, he was accustomed to attention. Conversations often paused when he entered a room. Employees stepped aside as he passed. He barely glanced at the woman before his eyes landed on a janitor's cart parked near a maintenance closet. Without asking who she was or why she was there, Dalton pointed toward the cart and spoke loudly enough for several people nearby to hear. "Go mop the floors. The lobby should look better than this before the board meeting starts." A few executives chuckled. One manager smirked openly. Another employee looked down to avoid eye contact. The woman stopped walking. For a brief second, the lobby became strangely quiet. Dalton expected embarrassment. He expected confusion. Instead, she simply looked at him with calm eyes and a composed expression. Then she nodded once. Not because she accepted his judgment. Not because she agreed with him. But because she seemed completely unaffected by his attempt to place her beneath him. That reaction unsettled a few people more than anger ever could have. She continued walking without another word. Dalton shrugged and resumed his conversation. The laughter returned. The moment appeared finished. But what nobody in that lobby understood was that less than 1 hour later, Dalton Mercer would struggle to hide the fear spreading across his face. The same executives who laughed would wish they had remained silent. And the woman they had mistaken for a maintenance worker would walk into a boardroom carrying information capable of changing the future of Mercer Holdings forever. Before we continue, if you enjoy stories about dignity, justice, and powerful life lessons, make sure to subscribe and leave a comment sharing where you are watching from today. Now, to understand how one careless sentence transformed an entire room full of powerful people, we need to go back 45 minutes earlier, before the elevators opened, before the assumptions began, and before anyone realized exactly who Arielle Vance really was. 45 minutes before she entered the lobby of Mercer Holdings, Arielle Vance stood alone near a large window inside Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. Morning sunlight stretched across the terminal floor while travelers hurried toward departure gates and baggage claims. She held a paper coffee cup in one hand and reviewed several documents stored inside a weathered leather folder. To anyone passing by, she looked like an ordinary business traveler preparing for another meeting. That assumption followed Arielle almost everywhere she went. It had followed her for years. Long before she became one of the most respected voices in community investment and economic development, she had learned that many people made decisions about others before hearing a single word they had to say. Growing up on the south side of Atlanta, Arielle watched her mother work 2 jobs while still finding time to help neighbors who needed support. Her mother often repeated the same lesson. The way people treat you tells you who they are. The way you respond tells you who you are. Arielle carried those words with her through every stage of her life. She earned scholarships, built nonprofit partnerships, launched workforce development programs, and eventually created the Vance Opportunity Foundation, an organization that helps struggling communities attract business investment and create jobs. Over the years, governors sought her advice. Universities invited her to speak. Major corporations partnered with her foundation. Yet she never developed the habit of displaying success through expensive clothes or luxury accessories. She preferred practical things that lasted. The leather folder she carried that morning was nearly 10 years old. Her navy blazer had accompanied her through dozens of meetings across the country. She cared far more about preparation than appearance. As her driver carried her toward downtown Atlanta, skyscrapers reflected the bright morning sky. The city looked vibrant and energetic. Arielle reviewed the meeting agenda one final time. Mercer Holdings was preparing for a major restructuring initiative that would affect thousands of employees and several surrounding communities. The board had recently approved a strategic partnership with the Vance Opportunity Foundation, and today would be the first official meeting involving key leadership. What very few people inside Mercer Holdings knew was that Ariel herself had been selected as the newest independent board member. Her appointment would be formally announced later that morning. She could have requested special treatment. She could have arranged an executive escort or demanded a public introduction upon arrival. Instead, she preferred simplicity. She wanted to observe the company before revealing her position. The black sedan eventually pulled beneath the covered entrance of Mercer Holdings headquarters. The building rose nearly 60 stories above the city streets, its glass exterior reflecting clouds drifting across the Georgia sky. Ariel stepped out, thanked the driver, adjusted the strap of her travel bag, and entered through the revolving doors. Inside, employees moved quickly between elevators and conference rooms. Phones rang. Conversations echoed through the lobby. Nobody recognized her. Nobody greeted her by name. Ariel simply smiled to herself. None of that bothered her. In fact, it gave her a chance to see the company exactly as it was when nobody thought they were being observed. She walked deeper into the building carrying the same quiet confidence that had guided her entire life, completely unaware that only a few minutes later, one careless assumption would reveal far more about Mercer Holdings than any board report ever could. While Ariel moved quietly through the lower floors of Mercer Holdings, Dalton Mercer was beginning the day exactly the way he always did. On the 57th floor, sunlight poured through massive glass windows that framed the Atlanta skyline in every direction. The city stretched for miles beneath him, a reminder of the empire he had spent more than 3 decades building. His executive office reflected the same philosophy that shaped his leadership style. Everything had a purpose. Everything projected success. Awards lined one wall. Industry recognitions filled another. A polished conference table occupied the center of the room while digital displays tracked market performance and company metrics in real time. Dalton stood beside the window reviewing reports for the upcoming board meeting. At 57 years old, he carried himself with the confidence of a man who had spent most of his life making decisions that affected thousands of employees. Investors trusted him. Financial analysts respected him. Business publications frequently featured him as one of the most influential executives in the Southeast. Over time, that success had created a dangerous habit. Dalton believed he could evaluate people quickly. He considered it one of his greatest strengths. A brief conversation, a first impression, a glance at someone's appearance. He often decided within seconds whether a person belonged in a room filled with decision makers. The habit had served him well often enough that he no longer questioned it. Unfortunately, confidence can slowly disguise itself as certainty, and certainty can blind people to things they never expect to miss. That morning, Dalton's attention focused on a strategic partnership that had generated significant discussion among board members during the previous month. Mercer Holdings planned to launch a major workforce initiative across several states, and outside advisors had become increasingly important to the project. While Dalton had reviewed summaries and recommendations, he had not paid much attention to the individuals behind them. Names on reports rarely interested him as much as financial outcomes. Across the hall, Lauren Whitaker moved between conference rooms coordinating preparations for the board meeting. As Senior Vice President of Human Resources, she shared many of Dalton's assumptions about professionalism and leadership. She believed successful people looked a certain way, dressed a certain way, and carried themselves according to unwritten corporate expectations. Neither she nor Dalton considered those beliefs unfair. To them, they simply seemed obvious. Employees throughout headquarters prepared for a busy day. Assistants organized schedules. Executives reviewed presentations. Catering staff arranged refreshments in meeting rooms overlooking the city. Elevators opened and closed continuously as visitors arrived from across the country. The atmosphere felt polished, efficient, and controlled. Yet beneath that polished surface, something important remained invisible. Neither Dalton nor Lauren understood that one of the most influential individuals connected to the company's future had already entered the building. Neither knew she was walking through the lobby at that very moment carrying documents that would soon place her at the center of every important conversation in the organization. If someone had told Dalton that morning that he was only minutes away from making the most embarrassing mistake of his professional career, he would have laughed at the suggestion. Standing in his office above the city, surrounded by evidence of his success, he felt completely in control. But sometimes the moments that change a person's perspective begin long before they recognize they are standing at the edge of a lesson they desperately need to learn. And several floors below, Ariel Vance was steadily approaching that lesson's beginning. Ariel stepped away from the main entrance and moved deeper into the headquarters lobby. The building was impressive even by the standards of major corporations. 40-foot ceilings stretched above polished marble floors. Sunlight poured through towering glass walls, filling the space with warm reflections that danced across chrome railings and stone surfaces. Employees crossed the lobby carrying tablets, coffee cups, and presentation materials while visitors checked in at reception desks positioned beneath a massive Mercer Holdings logo. Ariel slowed her pace slightly. She enjoyed observing organizations in their natural state. Annual reports could reveal numbers. Executive presentations could reveal strategy. But everyday interactions revealed culture. And culture often told the most important story. She noticed a maintenance employee holding an elevator door for a manager who never acknowledged him. She noticed a receptionist greeting visitors with genuine warmth despite the growing crowd. She noticed how people treated one another when they believed nobody important was watching. These small moments mattered to her. They always had. Near the center of the lobby, a janitor's cart sat beside a maintenance closet. Cleaning supplies were neatly organized on its shelves. A yellow caution sign leaned against the wall nearby. Ariel barely glanced at it as she continued toward the elevator bank. At that exact moment, the elevator doors opened on the executive floor above. Dalton Mercer emerged surrounded by department heads and senior leaders preparing for the board meeting. Their conversation focused on projections, expansion plans, and investor expectations. Several executives followed closely, eager to remain within Dalton's orbit. Among them was Lauren Whitaker, who reviewed scheduling updates while discussing seating arrangements for the meeting. As the group approached the main lobby, employees immediately began stepping aside. The shift in energy was noticeable. Conversations softened. Movement adjusted. People recognized power when it entered a room. Ariel happened to be walking toward the elevator corridor, as Dalton and his group crossed the lobby from the opposite direction. The distance between them closed quickly. Dalton's eyes landed on Ariel for only a second before moving to the travel bag, the simple blazer, and then the nearby janitor's cart. In his mind, the conclusion formed instantly. He never asked a question. He never introduced himself. He never considered another possibility. "Excuse me," he called out. Several nearby employees looked up. Ariel stopped and turned politely. Dalton pointed toward the janitor's cart. "The board meeting starts soon. Go take care of those floors before guests arrive." The words echoed more loudly than he intended. Silence followed. A few managers exchanged glances. One executive smiled awkwardly. Lauren lowered her eyes briefly before allowing a small laugh to escape. The reaction spread through several members of the group. Nothing dramatic. Just enough to make the moment unmistakably humiliating. Yet Ariel's expression never changed. She looked at Dalton calmly. Not with anger. Not with embarrassment. Simply with the quiet patience of someone who had experienced similar assumptions before. The sunlight reflecting through the lobby windows illuminated her face as she studied him for a moment. Then she nodded once. "Thank you," she said softly. The response confused several people. Dalton appeared mildly surprised. He expected correction. He expected explanation. Instead, Ariel resumed walking toward the elevators carrying her leather folder and travel bag. Behind her, the laughter faded as quickly as it had appeared. Dalton shrugged and continued toward the executive conference area. To him, the moment seemed insignificant. Another passing interaction in a busy day. But as the elevator doors closed around Ariel and carried her toward the upper floors, several people in the lobby felt a strange sense of discomfort they could not quite explain. Something about her calmness lingered in the air long after she disappeared from view. And within the folder she carried rested documents that would soon make every person involved wish they had treated that moment very differently. The elevator doors opened onto the executive level with a soft chime. Ariel stepped into a hallway lined with artwork, glass conference rooms, and framed photographs documenting decades of Mercer Holdings history. The atmosphere felt noticeably different from the lobby below. Conversations were quieter. Offices were larger. Every detail communicated status and influence. Yet Ariel walked through the corridor with the same calm pace she carried everywhere. She was not impressed by expensive furniture or executive titles. She was interested in people. And what she had witnessed downstairs remained fresh in her mind. Not because she felt insulted. Unfortunately, moments like that were not new to her. What concerned her was what the interaction revealed about the culture inside the company she was preparing to help guide. At the far end of the corridor, assistants moved quickly between conference rooms making final preparations for the board meeting. Catering staff arranged coffee service. Presentation screens displayed company logos and financial projections. The entire floor buzzed with anticipation. Yet very few people knew that one of the most important individuals attending the meeting had already arrived. Ariel paused beside a large window overlooking the city. Below, Atlanta stretched toward the horizon beneath a brilliant blue sky. Sunlight reflected from nearby buildings and filled the corridor with warm light. For a moment, she simply observed the city. Her mother used to tell her that patience reveals things that force never can. Ariel had learned the value of that lesson many times throughout her career. Behind her, a group of executives exited another conference room. Lauren Whitaker noticed Ariel standing near the window and immediately frowned. The simple blazer, the travel bag, the absence of any visible executive credentials. Lauren's assumptions formed almost instantly. She approached with a practiced corporate smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Can I help you find the service in trance?" she asked. Ariel turned politely. "I am actually looking for the board conference room." Ariel nodded. "I understand." Lauren's expression tightened slightly. "Perhaps someone gave you the wrong information." Another executive standing nearby looked toward Ariel's leather folder. "Maybe she is delivering documents." A few soft chuckles followed. Ariel remained completely composed. She could feel the assumptions moving through the group almost like a current. Nobody asked her name. Nobody asked why she was there. They simply continued building a story about her without evidence. "I appreciate your concern," Ariel said gently. "I am sure everything will become clear soon." The statement only deepened their confusion. Lauren folded her arms. "The board meeting is for senior leadership and invited guests." Ariel offered a small smile. "Then I suppose I am exactly where I need to be." Before Lauren could respond, an assistant hurried down the hallway carrying a stack of meeting packets. The young woman stopped suddenly when she saw Ariel. Recognition flashed across her face. "Ms. Vance," she said, "we have been expecting you." Silence spread through the corridor. The assistant immediately extended a packet embossed with the Mercer Holdings board seal. "The chairman asked me to personally make sure you received your materials before the meeting." Lauren's face lost color. The executives who had been smiling moments earlier became noticeably quiet. Ariel accepted the packet with a gracious thank you. Then she calmly continued toward the boardroom. Behind her, nobody laughed. Nobody made another assumption. And for the first time that morning, several people began wondering exactly who Ariel Vance was, and why the chairman himself seemed to be waiting for her arrival. Ariel entered the boardroom several minutes before the meeting was scheduled to begin. The room occupied the corner of the executive floor, and offered a breathtaking view of Atlanta through walls of glass that stretched from floor to ceiling. Sunlight poured across the long walnut conference table, illuminating leather chairs arranged with perfect precision. Nameplates, financial reports, and presentation folders sat neatly at each seat. The atmosphere felt quiet now, but within minutes it would become the center of every important decision facing Mercer Holdings. Ariel placed her leather folder on the table and took a seat near the chairman's position. Then she simply waited. Around her, the city moved in the distance. Cars flowed through downtown streets. Construction cranes stood against the skyline. The world continued its rhythm while a very different kind of construction was about to begin inside the boardroom. One by one, directors and executives entered. Some greeted each other warmly. Others reviewed reports while discussing quarterly projections. Several people noticed Ariel immediately. A few appeared surprised to see her sitting at the table. Others glanced toward the chairman's empty seat and quietly assumed there must be an explanation. Ariel remained calm. She did not introduce herself. She did not explain her presence. She simply listened. A surprising amount can be learned when people believe they already understand who you are. A few minutes later, Dalton Mercer entered with Lauren Whitaker and several senior executives. Their conversation stopped almost instantly when they noticed Ariel seated inside the boardroom. Dalton's expression tightened. For a brief moment, confusion crossed his face. Then came recognition. He remembered the woman from the lobby. The woman he had directed toward the janitor's cart. The woman everyone assumed did not belong. Lauren looked equally unsettled. Neither spoke. Ariel acknowledged them with a polite nod before returning her attention to the documents in front of her. Dalton took his seat across the table. Although he tried to focus on the meeting materials, his attention repeatedly drifted toward Ariel. Questions began forming in his mind. Why was she here? Why had the chairman requested her attendance? Why had the assistant addressed her with such respect? The uncertainty created a discomfort he was not accustomed to feeling. The room gradually filled until every seat was occupied. Finally, the chairman entered. Richard Holloway was a respected business leader whose opinion carried enormous weight throughout the organization. Conversation stopped immediately as he approached the head of the table. He greeted several directors before turning toward Ariel with a warm smile. "Good morning," he said. "I am glad you could join us." Ariel returned the smile. "Thank you for inviting me." Dalton felt a knot tighten in his stomach. The familiarity between them was impossible to ignore. Richard waited until the room settled into silence. Then he looked around the table. "Before we begin today's agenda, there is an important announcement." Several executives straightened in their seats. Richard continued. "As many of you know, Mercer Holdings has spent the last year searching for leadership capable of helping us expand our community investment strategy and workforce development initiatives." A presentation screen illuminated behind him. The company logo disappeared. A new image appeared. It was Ariel. Professional. Confident. Respected. The room became completely silent. Dalton stared at the screen. Richard's voice filled the boardroom. "Please join me in welcoming our newest board member and strategic investment partner, Ms. Ariel Vance, founder of the Vance Opportunity Foundation, and one of the most influential community development leaders in the United States." The color drained from Dalton's face. Across the table, Ariel sat quietly beneath the glow of the presentation screen while every assumption made that morning collapsed under the weight of a single undeniable truth. For several seconds, nobody moved. The presentation screen continued displaying Ariel's photograph, along with a list of accomplishments that seemed to stretch endlessly across the wall. Billions of dollars directed toward economic development projects. Thousands of jobs created. Partnerships with universities, municipalities, and major corporations throughout the country. Every achievement reinforced the same reality. The woman many people had dismissed that morning possessed more influence than most of the executives seated around the table. Richard Holloway allowed the information to settle before continuing. "Ms. Vance has agreed to help guide our next phase of workforce investment and community expansion. Her foundation will also serve as a strategic partner in several initiatives scheduled to launch over the next 5 years." Around the table, directors nodded with visible respect. Some were already familiar with Ariel's work. Others appeared impressed by the scale of her accomplishments. Yet across the room, Dalton Mercer could barely focus on the chairman's words. His attention remained fixed on Ariel. Every moment from earlier replayed in painful detail. The janitor's cart. The command. The laughter. The assumptions. What had seemed insignificant at the time now felt impossible to escape. Lauren Whitaker sat equally motionless. Her eyes remained locked on the presentation screen. She remembered every dismissive question she had asked in the hallway. Every conclusion she had reached without evidence. For perhaps the first time in years, neither she nor Dalton had an explanation ready. Richard eventually invited Ariel to address the board. The room fell silent once again. Ariel stood and walked toward the front of the room. Sunlight streamed through the glass walls behind her, creating a warm glow that contrasted sharply with the tension surrounding several executives seated nearby. She placed her hands lightly on the conference table and looked around the room. "Thank you for the opportunity to be here," she began. Her voice was calm and steady. There was no arrogance, no attempt to embarrass anyone, no trace of resentment. That surprised Dalton more than anything else. Ariel could have used the moment to expose every mistake made that morning. Instead, she focused on something entirely different. She spoke about economic opportunity, about communities overlooked by traditional investment strategies, about creating pathways that allowed people to succeed regardless of where they started in life. The more she spoke, the quieter the room became. Her words carried weight because they came from experience rather than theory. She described programs that transformed struggling neighborhoods. She explained how businesses grew stronger when leaders recognized potential instead of appearances. Several board members began taking notes. Others nodded thoughtfully. Even those unfamiliar with her work quickly understood why she had earned national respect. Then Ariel said something that seemed to settle directly over the room. "The greatest opportunities are often hidden behind assumptions." Silence followed. Nobody missed the significance of that statement. Ariel continued without changing her tone. "When we decide who belongs before we truly know them, we do not just risk hurting people. We risk overlooking value, talent, and perspective that could help us become better." Dalton lowered his eyes. The words felt less like criticism and more like truth. That made them impossible to dismiss. The meeting continued for nearly an hour. Yet the atmosphere had completely changed. People listened differently. Questions became more thoughtful. Discussions became more collaborative. By the time Ariel returned to her seat, the room viewed her not as a guest, not as an outsider, but as one of the most important voices at the table. And sitting across from her, Dalton realized that the fear he felt earlier was no longer about embarrassment. It was about recognizing how close he had come to allowing prejudice and assumption to define a decision that should have been guided by character. The meeting officially ended shortly after noon, but very few people rushed to leave. Small groups remained around the boardroom discussing ideas Ariel had introduced during the session. Several directors approached her with questions about workforce development programs. Others wanted to learn more about the partnerships her foundation had built across the country. The atmosphere felt noticeably different from the one that had existed only a few hours earlier. Respect had replaced assumption. Curiosity had replaced judgment. Sunlight continued pouring through the glass walls overlooking Atlanta, filling the room with a warm glow that softened the sharp edges of the morning's tension. Ariel gathered her notes slowly and placed them back inside her leather folder. She had no interest in making anyone uncomfortable. Her purpose had never been to prove people wrong. It had always been to help people see more clearly. Across the room, Dalton remained seated longer than everyone else. Most executives had already left. Even Lauren Whitaker stood near the doorway speaking quietly with another board member. Dalton stared at the conference table for several moments before finally standing. The confidence that usually surrounded him seemed absent now. He walked toward Ariel without the authority he carried earlier in the day. This time he approached as one person speaking honestly to another. Ariel looked up as he stopped beside her. For a moment neither said anything. The silence felt heavier than any prepared speech. Finally Dalton spoke. "I owe you an apology." His voice was quieter than usual. Ariel listened. "What happened this morning should never have happened," he continued. "I made assumptions about you before I knew anything about you. I judged you based on what I thought I saw instead of who you actually were." The words came slowly, but they were sincere. Dalton was not trying to protect his reputation. He was confronting a mistake he could no longer ignore. Ariel remained calm. She could see the discomfort in his eyes. Not fear anymore. Regret. Lauren quietly approached as well. "I would like to apologize too," she said. "I treated you unfairly. Looking back, I never once asked your name. I decided who you were before giving you the chance to tell me." Ariel looked at both of them. Through the glass walls behind them, the city skyline shimmered beneath the bright afternoon sun. The boardroom had nearly emptied. The noise of business had faded into the distance. What remained was something much more personal. "Do you know what I have learned after years of walking into rooms where people underestimate me?" Ariel asked gently. Neither answered. Most assumptions tell you more about the person making them than the person receiving them. Dalton lowered his eyes. The statement carried no anger. That somehow made it more powerful. Ariel continued. People often believe respect should be earned after success is proven. I think respect should come first. Success simply reveals whether our judgment was accurate. Neither Dalton nor Lauren attempted to defend themselves. There was nothing to argue with. The truth stood clearly between them. After a moment, Ariel smiled. Not because she felt victorious. Not because she enjoyed their discomfort. Because she believed people were capable of growth. We all have blind spots, she said. What matters is whether we choose to see them when they are revealed. Dalton nodded slowly. Then he extended his hand. This time there was no hesitation. No assumption. No audience. Ariel accepted the gesture. The handshake lasted only a second, but it carried more meaning than the one that had occurred earlier that morning. In that quiet boardroom filled with sunlight and reflection, forgiveness accomplished what embarrassment never could. It opened the door for change. And for the first time that day, Dalton Mercer understood that true leadership begins not when people admire your authority, but when you have the courage to confront your own mistakes. As the afternoon slowly gave way to evening, the headquarters of Mercer Holdings began to empty. Executives returned to their offices. Assistants gathered presentation materials. Conference room screens went dark one by one. The energy that had filled the building throughout the morning gradually faded into a quieter rhythm. Yet for many people who had witnessed the events of the day, something important remained. A lesson. A realization. A memory that would stay with them far longer than any business report discussed during the board meeting. Ariel Vance left the boardroom carrying the same leather folder she had brought into the building that morning. Nothing about her appearance had changed. The navy blazer was the same. The travel bag remained slung over her shoulder. She had not become more important because people finally recognized her title. She had been the same person all along. The difference was that now others could see what had always been there. As she walked through the executive floor, several employees greeted her warmly. Some introduced themselves. Others thanked her for the ideas she shared during the meeting. Ariel responded with the same kindness she offered everyone. Respect, she believed, should never depend on a person's position. Near the elevators, she paused beside the large window overlooking Atlanta. The city glowed beneath the soft colors of late afternoon. Golden sunlight reflected across glass towers while traffic moved steadily through the streets below. For a moment, she simply admired the view. Then she stepped into the elevator and began her descent toward the lobby. Downstairs, the atmosphere felt noticeably different from earlier. Employees who had witnessed the morning interaction now looked at her with new understanding. Some smiled. Others nodded respectfully. A few appeared quietly embarrassed when they remembered their own assumptions. Ariel carried no resentment toward any of them. Life had taught her that people often reveal their character during moments when they think nobody is paying attention. The important thing was what they chose to do after the truth became clear. On the executive floor above, Dalton Mercer stood alone inside his office. The city skyline stretched beyond the glass walls exactly as it had that morning. The awards remained in place. The financial reports still covered his desk. Nothing in the room had changed. Yet everything felt different. He thought about the confidence with which he had judged a stranger. He thought about the opportunities people miss when they decide who belongs before they take the time to learn who someone really is. For years he had believed leadership meant making fast decisions. Today he learned that wisdom sometimes requires slowing down long enough to see people clearly. As the sun moved lower in the sky, Ariel stepped through the revolving doors and onto the sidewalk outside Mercer Holdings. A gentle breeze moved through the streets. The sounds of the city surrounded her. She took a deep breath and began walking toward the waiting car that would take her to the airport. Behind her, the glass tower reflected the colors of sunset across its surface. Inside the building, employees continued their work. Meetings would happen tomorrow. Decisions would be made. Business would move forward. But the culture of an organization changes through moments, not policies. And one moment had changed many people that day. Dalton eventually left his office and walked to the same lobby where everything had begun. The janitor's cart still stood near the maintenance closet, quietly waiting for the evening cleaning crew. He stopped for a second and looked at it. Earlier that morning, It had represented an assumption. Now it represented a lesson. A simple reminder that dignity belongs to every person, regardless of title, position, or appearance. Outside, the final light of day faded across Atlanta's skyline. Ariel's car disappeared into the flow of evening traffic. Dalton remained near the glass entrance watching the city beyond. No applause filled the room. No speeches remained to be given. Only silence. And within that silence lived a truth that neither success nor authority could replace. The strongest people are not always the loudest in the room. Sometimes they are the ones who respond to disrespect with grace, to judgment with patience, and to ignorance with the kind of quiet strength that changes hearts long after the moment has passed.